Human Rights Watch has called on the Nigerian authorities to lift measures aimed at suppressing recent protests against police brutality. It's described the freezing of bank accounts of people linked to last month's demonstrations as a gross abuse of power. According to Human Rights Watch, the freezing of bank accounts started days after nationwide protests over an abusive police unit began on October the 8th. The Central Bank of Nigeria instructed private banks to freeze several organizations and individuals' accounts to stop the flow of funds supporting the protests. The National Broadcasting Commission, the state-run television and radio regulator, has fined 3 independent television stations that reported on the violent security force response to protests. They used footage posted on social media that the Commission claims were unverified and contributed to the violence. There had been threats of fresh protests against the blocking of the accounts of key protesters. For more on this situation, we're now joined on the line from Abuja in Nigeria by Anietie Ewang, who's a Human Rights Watch researcher in the Africa division. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Many thanks for having me.
All right, so it's quite disturbing to hear that the authorities were using tricks or tactics to deflate and to stop protesters, including freezing bank accounts.
Absolutely. We saw that there was a lot of momentum gathered around the country, around the protests, and just at the peak of it all, many individuals and organizations supporting protesters with basic necessities, including food, water, and health services, found that they could no longer carry out transactions. And when they reached out to their banks to understand why, they got a really vague message that this was on instruction from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Now, there were no court orders, which is required by law, or there was no other, effort to provide any sort of logical and legal explanation for why these actions were carried out. And we see that as a gross abuse of power and attempts by the authorities to suppress legitimate protests and call for accountability by citizens.
Has there been anything like this before? I mean, this is random extrajudicial action, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's what it appears to be. I mean, prior to this, the central bank had been accused of arbitrarily shutting down bank accounts for various reasons. And it had actually been raised in the federal legislative house. But I think that, with this action forming part of the attempt to suppress protests which gathered worldwide attention, we've seen more attention being brought to the central bank and their role within the Nigerian society. They're supposed to be regulators of the financial sector and carry out their jobs within the framework of the laws and the other policies that are set in place. But such arbitrary actions, we think, indicate a wider problem of malfeasance and impunity that threaten, the whole idea of democracy, human rights, and fundamental freedoms.
And by bypassing the court systems, it's quite possible that a lot of innocent people were caught up just on the basis of they were suspected to be involved as leaders or inciters.
I mean, the testimonies that we gathered from many of the people we interviewed is essentially that, they received monies, and a lot of the records, the bank records going between customers transferring monies had NSARS on it. So by all indication, any transaction, if it was to donate to the protest, if it was to receive money to support the protest, was flagged. And even beyond these protests, which have now stopped, we see that these orders are still existing, and many people are having to deal with the impact of their bank accounts shut down. People who run businesses and need to be able to debit and credit accounts. People who have all of their money in a particular bank account, which has now been shut down, are stranded. They're looking for means to be able to survive until they figure out, what legal procedure or any other means possible to get the authorities to block their accounts. It's brought severe hardships to institutions and individuals who are involved in this. And it is something that the authorities must really reverse to bring credibility and confidence back into the financial sector.
How have the authorities explained away these actions?
I mean, at first, there was complete silence. And when civil society groups and individuals started to really raise these concerns and draw in the private banks who heeded the directives of the authorities without any sort of court orders, which is required by law, we saw the central bank try to obtain a belated court order, alleging that many of these accounts were being investigated for terrorism financing. And they secured the order last week, Friday, I believe. And this order will allow them to have these bank accounts frozen for 3 months while they carry out their alleged investigations. Many of the groups have obviously taken on legal proceedings to challenge this order and are hoping to be successful to be able to access their monies again. But we've seen that the central bank has not acted according to the rule of law. They've tried to justify their actions after the fact with vague references to terrorism financing, which requires quite a lot to prove. And it'll be something to watch to see how they try to contextualize these allegations or prove these allegations.
Are the authorities still engaged in these activities, and others to try and flush out those that they recognize as perhaps leaders of the protests and anyone who was supporting it? Does this continue, and what else are they doing?
So, I mean, this is one amongst many other measures that we've seen during the protests and even after that the authorities have used to suppress voices and to, like you said, almost punish, people who've led these protests and brought it to worldwide attention. There's been reports of a no-fly list that the authorities have compiled, although they've come out to deny that. However, one of the major individuals who was involved in providing legal assistance to protesters who were arrested was stopped from flying outside of the country, and her passport was seized for a number of days before it was returned to her. We've seen the authorities also go around arresting individuals who've tried to start protests, which is a human right and which they should be able to carry out. All protest organizers around the country have been arrested and detained, and we've seen also individuals reporting on the extent to which social media played a role, and government officials also taking that as an indication of the need to regulate social media more tightly so that they can somewhat control the narrative and also clamp down on individuals who are actively pushing for accountability or speaking out against human rights abuses by the government, or more generally just dissenting against the government. And so there's quite a concern that this might be an agenda that the authorities try to pursue. And again, there's been attacks on the media. We documented in our report that at least 3 independent media houses were fined, huge fines, for reporting on abuses by security forces during the protests, using social media footages which the National Broadcasting Commission has said were unverified and caused more harm. But then the question of the proof, again, that these social media footages were unverified and they caused harm is one that the Commission has been unable to answer. In addition to the fact that there was no fair hearing. These independent media houses were not given a chance to provide information on their fact-checking process. And so it is sort of like a situation where the NBC brought these allegations and passed out their judgment without even hearing from those who they had accused. And by all means, we see that again as abuse of power. So it's been one thing after the other, but what's been clear is that the authorities are really bringing out an arsenal of weapons to stop the protests, to stop these discussions from really escalating to the point where citizens are out on the streets demanding accountability. And it is totally inimical to the whole idea of accountability, which the authorities have pledged to since the start of the protest.
All right, we've run out of time, but one quick question. This suppression, where is it being directed from? Is it from Abuja? Could this be at the behest of the person at the highest office in the land?
Well, I mean, that's still a little unclear, but for many individuals, it's hard that, core regulators of society, including the NBC and which is the National Broadcasting Commission and the Central Bank, which, answer to the chief executive officer in many ways, would be acting without any sort of go ahead from there. So there is a lot of conviction that the president is if not behind all of this, he is aware. And as the head of the country, he has a duty to ensure that all of the institutions and the people acting on behalf of institutions under him act in accordance with the rule of law and respect for human rights. And where that is not being done, when that is not the case, then I think citizens can point to the fact that he is complicit and he is also duty-bound to ensure accountability for all that is ongoing right now.
All right. Thanks so much indeed for that update on the situation in Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time. That was Anietie Ewang, who's a Human Rights Watch researcher, Africa Division, based in Abuja in Nigeria. We'll have more for you after the break. Stay with us.